Man refuses to let black soldier sit in her first class. Then she gives him a shocking note. After a long and exhausting journey, Lieutenant Eliza Smith was finally ready to head home. After months of deployment, she was finally returning home. The exhaustion of military life had worn her down, and as she walked through the airport, her heavy duffel bag hanging off her shoulder, all she could think about was rest. Eliza was in her uniform, made of the familiar olive green fabric, which was faded and worn from tough conditions. The deep lines on her face told the stories of hardships, sleepless nights, and the memories of lost friends. Yet, she composed herself with the same calm dignity as always. When she boarded her flight, she was surprised to find that her seat was in first class. The airline had upgraded her in honor of her service. Feeling grateful and a bit uncomfortable, she settled into the plush seat. However, amidst the business suits and designer clothes of the other first-class passengers, she felt out of place. Just as she began to relax, a man approached her, his face filled with annoyance and disbelief. He was well-dressed and possessed an air of the grandeur of a luxury flight, one that Eliza had seen before. "I'm sorry," he said in an irritated tone. "I think you're in the wrong seat. This is my seat." Eliza showed him her ticket and said, "I think there's been a mistake. This is my seat, 3A. The man glanced at her ticket and then looked back at her with anger. "There must be some sort of mix-up. You're a soldier. You should be in coach, not in first class." Eliza felt a wave of embarrassment and anger. She took a deep breath to maintain her composure. "I'm sorry, sir, but this is my seat." The man pointed his finger at her and looked around for support. "You're not supposed to be here." Eliza didn't know how to respond. She felt the eyes of other passengers on her, some curious, others judgmental. Just as she was about to offer to change her seat to avoid further confrontation, a flight attendant arrived. "Is there a problem here?" the flight attendant asked, her tone polite but firm. The man quickly explained the situation, but the flight attendant simply smiled at Eliza. "Lieutenant Smith, your seat is indeed in first class. Thank you for your service," she said, turning to the man. "Sir, your seat is in 5A, a little further back." The man's face turned red with embarrassment, but instead of apologizing, he angrily walked to his seat. Eliza felt a mix of relief and frustration as she sat back in her seat. She tried to push the incident out of her mind, but it lingered with her throughout the flight. As the plane ascended, Eliza thought about her military life. She thought about how much she and her fellow soldiers had sacrificed, how many lives had been lost, and how many relationships had been formed. She also thought about the discrimination she had faced and how it still affected her. It wasn't just the man's words. It was a reminder that despite everything she had done for her country, some people still saw her as less. It was a pain she had carried for years, a pain that never went away. As the flight continued, Eliza felt uneasy. She noticed that the man was looking at her repeatedly from his seat, his expression disdainful. She decided that she couldn't let it end there. She had faced greater challenges in life and wouldn't let a stranger's prejudice ruin her journey home. She took a small notepad from her bag and began writing a note. It was a simple message, but she hoped it would convey her feelings. "Dear sir, I understand there was a misunderstanding earlier, and I want to clarify it. I am proud of my service to my country and the opportunity I had to defend the freedoms we all enjoy. I have seen the cost of those freedoms firsthand, and I carry with me the memories of those who could not return home. I hope that one day we can all see each other, not for our differences, but for our shared humanity. We are all more alike than different, and kindness is something we can all show. Sincerely, Lieutenant Eliza Smith." Eliza carefully folded the note and called the flight attendant. She asked her to deliver the note to the man. The flight attendant, who had witnessed the earlier incident, took the note with a smile. Eliza watched as the flight attendant handed the note to the man. He looked surprised, and as he opened the note, his expression became more complex. Eliza couldn't quite see what he was feeling, but she hoped her words had made an impact. The man did not look at Eliza again. He kept reading the note repeatedly, lost in thought. Eliza didn't expect a response, but she felt that she had taken the right step. As the plane began to descend, Leah prepared to disembark. She was ready to leave the incident behind and focus on the joy of reuniting with her family. But as she stood up to retrieve her bag, the man approached her. He looked different now, polite and almost apologetic. He had the note in his hand, and for a moment he seemed uncertain about what to say. "If you love your family and believe in spreading positivity, like this video and subscribe to stay connected," he said. The man began to speak, his voice softer than before. "I wanted to thank you for your note. It really made me think." Eliza nodded, waiting for him to continue. "I realized that I was wrong before," he admitted. his gaze dropping to the floor. I had made assumptions about you that were unfair and were based solely on my own prejudices. I am truly sorry. Eliza could see the sincerity in his eyes, and it softened her heart. Thank you, she said gently. It takes courage to admit when you're wrong. The man hesitated for a moment, then extended his hand. My name is David, he said, and I want you to know that I am grateful for your service. I lost my brother in Afghanistan a few years ago. He was a soldier too. I guess seeing you brought up a lot of emotions I wasn't prepared for. Eliza felt a sense of empathy as she took his hand. I'm sorry for your loss, she replied, genuine compassion in her voice. Losing someone who cared for others while on duty is never easy. David nodded, his eyes moistening. Thank you, he said softly, and thank you for reminding me that we're all in this together. As they exited the plane, Eliza and David walked side by side, two strangers who had found a moment of connection in an unexpected place. The note Eliza had written had bridged the gap between them, allowing them to see each other not as adversaries, but as fellow humans. When they reached the gate, David turned to Eliza one last time. If you ever need anything, don't hesitate to reach out, he said, handing her a business card. And please take care of yourself, Eliza. Eliza smiled, slipping the card into her pocket. I will. You take care too, David. As she watched him walk away, a sense of peace settled within Eliza. The encounter had started with hostility but ended with understanding and respect. It was a reminder that even in moments of conflict, there is always the possibility for growth and connection. Eliza left the airport with a renewed sense of hope. She knew the road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but she also knew there were people like David who were willing to learn, change, and come together in the name of kindness and compassion. And that, she realized, was something worth fighting for. What moments of connection have you experienced that helped bridge the gap between you and someone else? Share your stories in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you.
Man denies first-class seat to black soldier. What she does next will shock you. Sergeant Leah Matthews stared at her reflection in the airport bathroom mirror, hastily wiping away a stray tear. 6 months in Afghanistan had left its mark not just in the new scar along her jawline, but in the haunted look that now shadowed her dark eyes. Her fingers trembled slightly as they traced the first-class boarding past an unexpected upgrade that should have been a small, bright spot in her journey home. Instead, it would become the catalyst for a confrontation that would change multiple lives forever, though she didn't know it yet. That path to that transformation began 17 minutes later when she heard the words, "There must be some mistake. This is first class." Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Sergeant Leah Matthews wasn't born into privilege. Growing up on Chicago's South Side, she learned early that life rarely offered handouts. Her father's sudden death from a heart attack when she was 15 left her mother struggling to support 2 children on a teacher's assistant salary. But it was her younger brother Tyler's diagnosis with a rare autoimmune disorder that truly shaped Leah's path. "We'll figure something out," her mother would whisper late at night when she thought Leah was asleep. But the mounting medical bills and the sight of Tyler growing weaker with each passing month told a different story. The military hadn't been Leah's childhood dream. She'd wanted to be a doctor, but the promise of medical coverage for immediate family members made the decision crystal clear. The day she announced her enlistment, her mother had cried. Not the quiet tears of grief she'd shown at Dad's funeral, but deep, racking sobs. "You shouldn't have to sacrifice your dreams for us," she'd protested. But Leah had simply hugged her mother tight, already feeling the steel of resolve strengthening her spine. "Sometimes our dreams just take a different path," she'd replied. Basic training had been her first taste of the prejudices she'd face. Despite graduating top of her high school class and scoring exceptionally on her aptitude tests, certain instructors seemed determined to see her fail. "You're not cut out for this," Matthews, they'd say, watching her struggle through grueling physical challenges. But for every doubting voice, there was a fellow recruit offering encouragement, a helping hand, a shared water bottle during exhausting runs. She graduated third in her class, proving every detractor wrong. The ceremony had been bittersweet. Tyler was too sick to attend, watching via video call from his hospital bed instead. But his weak voice cheering as she received her honors had fueled her determination to excel even further. Her rise through the ranks wasn't meteoric, but it was steady and earned. Each promotion came with new challenges and responsibilities, which she met with the same quiet determination that had gotten her through basic training. By her second tour in Afghanistan, she'd earned the respect of both her superiors and those under her command. It was during that tour that she truly understood the meaning of brotherhood in arms. Race, gender, background, none of it mattered when bullets were flying. She'd saved the lives of 3 fellow soldiers during an ambush outside Kabul, earning a Purple Heart and a combat commendation in the process. The scar on her jaw was a permanent reminder of that day of how close she'd come to not making it home. Her unit had been diverse. Maria Rodriguez from Texas, whose quick thinking had saved them all during a firefight. John Chen from California, who could fix any vehicle under the harshest conditions. Ahmed, their local interpreter, who risked everything to help them navigate both the terrain and the culture. They became her second family, bound together by shared danger and unwavering trust. But it was her friendship with Private Jack Wilson that had left the deepest mark. Jack had been the epitome of the all-American soldier, tall, blonde, from a privileged background in Boston. On paper, they shouldn't have had anything in common. Yet he'd become like a brother to her, their late-night conversations about family, hopes and fears creating a bond that transcended their differences. "You know what I love about the military," he'd told her once, during a quiet moment between missions. "Out here, we're all just soldiers. No one cares where you came from or what you look like. They only care if they can trust you to have their back." A week later, he'd proven those words by taking a bullet meant for her during a routine patrol gone wrong. The memory of Jack's sacrifice haunted her, but it also drove her. Every time she faced discrimination or doubt, she remembered his words about trust and brotherhood. She channeled that spirit into her leadership style, earning a reputation for being tough but fair, demanding but supportive. When her mother called 3 months into her current deployment, crying with joy because Tyler's latest treatment was showing promising results, Leah felt a profound sense of validation. Every hardship, every struggle, every moment of doubt had been worth it for that single piece of news. Now, after 6 grueling months of her third tour, Sergeant Leah Matthews was finally heading home. The weight of her experiences, both triumphs and tragedies, had changed her, shaped her into someone stronger yet more compassionate than she'd ever imagined she could be. Her uniform, worn with pride and marked by service, told only part of her story. The rest was written in the steel of her resolve, the kindness in her eyes, and the unwavering belief that bridges could be built across any divide. Little did she know that her greatest test of this belief wasn't waiting in some far-off battlefield, but in the first-class cabin of Flight 237 to Chicago, where an encounter with prejudice would force her to draw upon every lesson she'd learned about courage, compassion, and the true meaning of service. The fluorescent lights of O'Hare International Airport's Terminal 3 buzzed overhead as Leah adjusted her crisp military uniform. 6 months in Afghanistan had left her body lean and taut, but exhaustion weighed heavily on her shoulders. Her last deployment had been particularly challenging. 3 soldiers lost, countless close calls, and the constant, grinding tension of knowing each patrol could be your last. The unexpected first-class upgrade had come as a surprise. "Thank you for your service," Sergeant Matthews, the airline representative, had said warmly, tapping away at her keyboard. "We had a last-minute cancellation in first class, and we'd be honored to offer you an upgrade." It was a small gesture, but after months of military transport planes and hard bunks, the promise of a comfortable seat felt like luxury beyond measure. Her phone buzzed another text from her mother. "Tyler's fever is down. Doctor says he can come to the airport. Can't wait to see you, sweetheart." Leah smiled, her first genuine smile in weeks. Her brother's condition had stabilized thanks to the experimental treatment the military insurance had covered. The timing of her return couldn't have been better. Tomorrow was his 16th birthday. The terminal was busy with the usual chaos of civilian travel. Business people hurried past with their rolling suitcases, families wrangled excited children, couples embraced in tearful reunions. It all felt surreal after the structured intensity of military life. Leah found herself automatically scanning crowds for threats, her hand occasionally twitching toward a weapon that wasn't there. Flight 237 to Chicago will begin boarding in approximately 15 minutes, the announcement crackled overhead. Leah checked her watch, a habit ingrained by years of military precision. She had time to make one more call. "Captain Rodriguez." It's Matthews. Her commanding officer had asked her to check in upon arrival. "Yes, sir." "Just waiting to board." "No, sir, no complications." "Yes, sir, I'll have those reports on your desk next week." She ended the call, her mind drifting to the paperwork awaiting her. 6 months of combat operations generated a mountain of documentation. A young girl in a pink dress stared at her from across the waiting area, eyes wide with curiosity. Leah offered a gentle smile, remembering how she'd once looked at soldiers with the same mixture of awe and uncertainty. The girl's mother noticed her daughter's staring and began to apologize, but Leah waved it off. "It's okay," she said. "Would you like to see my sergeant's stripes?" As she knelt to show the girl her insignia, a flash of memory hit her, doing the same thing with an Afghan child outside a village school. The contrast between that moment and this one made her head spin. There, every interaction was shadowed by the possibility of danger. Here, in the safety of home, she could simply be a soldier making a child smile. "Now boarding grouper for Flight 237 to Chicago," the gate agent announced. Leah gathered her small military-issued backpack. Everything else would arrive with her unit's equipment next week. As she approached the gate, she noticed several passengers watching her, their expressions ranging from respect to curiosity to something less welcoming. She handed her boarding pass to the gate agent, whose eyes widened slightly at the first-class designation. "Thank you for your service, Sergeant," the young man said, scanning her ticket. "My brother's in the Marines." Leah nodded in acknowledgement, the familiar phrase washing over her like water. She'd heard it countless times since returning stateside, each person's gratitude genuine, but few understanding the true weight of what they were thanking her for. The jet bridge stretched before her like a tunnel between worlds. With each step, she felt herself trying to shift gears from soldier to civilian, from commander to passenger, from the hypervigilant survival mode of deployment to the relative peace of home. It wasn't an easy transition. The military had protocols and procedures for everything. Civilian life was messier, less predictable. Her phone buzzed again, a text from Maria, her battle buddy. "Land safe, sister. Don't let these civilians stress you. Remember, we've faced worse than first-class snobs." Leah smiled at her friend's uncanny ability to anticipate her anxiety. Maria had been right beside her during their worst firefight, and somehow she still knew exactly what Leah needed to hear. The plane's cabin loomed ahead, its first-class section gleaming with leather seats and polished surfaces. It was a far cry from her last flight, a cramped C-130 transport plane evacuating wounded soldiers. The memory made her pause at the threshold, one hand gripping the doorframe as she steadied herself. "Welcome aboard, Sergeant Matthews," the flight attendant greeted her warmly. "Your seat is 2A, just to your left." Leah nodded her thanks, moving with military precision toward her assigned seat. As she stowed her backpack in the overhead compartment, she could feel eyes on her, curious, evaluating, judging. Her uniform often had that effect, making her simultaneously visible and invisible, respected and suspect. Settling into the plush seat, Leah allowed herself a moment to close her eyes. In a few hours she'd be home, embracing her mother, ruffling Tyler's hair, sleeping in her own bed. But first she had to navigate this transition, this strange space between warrior and civilian, between the person she'd become and the person her family remembered. Little did she know that this flight would become its own kind of battlefield, one where the enemies weren't armed with weapons but with prejudices, and where victory would require a different kind of courage altogether. "Excuse me, I believe you're in my seat," the voice cut through Leah's moment of tranquility like a blade. Sharp, precise, dripping with barely concealed disdain. Leah opened her eyes to find a well-dressed man in his 50s looming over her, his expensive suit and carefully manicured appearance suggesting corporate success. David Carlson, though she didn't know his name yet, stood in the aisle with an air of entitled certainty, his lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval as his gaze raked over her uniform, pausing deliberately at her sergeant stripes. "I'm sorry, sir, but this is my assigned seat." Leah's voice remained steady, professional, the same tone she'd used countless times to diffuse tense situations in combat zones. She reached for her boarding pass, but his next words froze her movement. "There must be some mistake," he announced, voice rising deliberately to carry to nearby passengers. "This is first class. I paid $12,000 for this seat. I don't know what kind of affirmative action program the airline is running, but I won't have my flight ruined." The cabin fell silent. Several passengers turned to watch the unfolding drama, their expressions ranging from embarrassment to curiosity to barely concealed agreement. A young woman in row 3 had already pulled out her phone, its camera lens glinting as it captured the scene. So Leah began, but he cut her off with a dismissive wave. "I don't care what kind of uniform you're wearing. I've worked too hard to have my comfort compromised by some diversity hire." His voice grew louder with each word, face flushing red. "I demand to speak to the captain." A white-haired woman across the aisle gasped audibly. "How dare you?" she started to say, but her husband gripped her arm, silently shaking his head. "Don't get involved." Leah felt the familiar weight of being the only person of color in a room full of observers, the pressure to remain calm when every instinct screamed to defend herself. She'd faced incoming fire with less internal turmoil than this moment. The lead flight attendant appeared, her practiced smile masking concern. "Is there a problem here?" "Yes, there certainly is," David snapped, snatching Leah's boarding pass from her outstretched hand. "This person claims to have a first-class ticket. Surely there's been some sort of mistake." Another passenger, a middle-aged man in a business suit, chimed in from his seat. "I have to agree. I frequently fly first class, and there should be certain standards maintained." The flight attendant examined Leah's boarding pass, her professional demeanor unwavering. "Everything appears to be in order, sir. Sergeant Matthews was upgraded as a gesture of appreciation for her military service. She is absolutely entitled to this seat." "Military service?" David scoffed, his voice taking on a dangerous edge. "Let me tell you something about military service. My brother was a real soldier who gave his life for this country. He didn't get any special treatment, and he certainly didn't use his uniform to demand privileges he didn't deserve." The words hit Leah like physical blows, but she maintained her composure. 6 months of combat hadn't broken her. This man's prejudice wouldn't either. But before she could respond, another voice joined the fray. "I got it all on video," announced the young woman with the phone. "This is going viral. First-class racist trending in 3, 2, 1. David's face contorted with rage. "How dare you? I'm not. This isn't about." He turned to the gathering crowd of passengers seeking allies. "You all see what's happening here, right? They're trying to make this about race when it's about standards, about respect for those of us who," said the flight attendant's voice cut through his tirade, steel beneath her professional tone. "If you cannot maintain a civil tone, we will be forced to remove you from this flight." "Remove me?" David's voice rose to a shout. "I'm a platinum member. I've flown over 2 million miles with this airline. You can't?" "Actually, sir, we can." A new voice interjected. The captain had emerged from the cockpit, his presence commanding immediate attention. "And we will, if necessary. Now, would you like to find your assigned seat, or shall I call airport security?" A tense silence fell over the cabin. Leah could feel the weight of dozens of stares, the quiet buzz of whispered conversations, the subtle clicks of more phones recording the scene. She thought of Jack, of his sacrifice, of all the times they'd talked about proving yourself through actions rather than words. Then, with deliberate calm, she stood. Her full height put her eye to eye with David, her posture parade ground perfect. When she spoke, her voice carried the quiet authority of someone who had faced real threats and survived. "Mr. Carlson," she said, reading his name from the briefcase at his feet, "I understand you're upset. And you're right about one thing: your brother's sacrifice deserves respect. All of our sacrifices do. That's why I'd like to share something with you, if you're willing to listen." She reached into her breast pocket and withdrew a worn photograph, its edges softened by time and handling. This was taken 2 weeks ago, outside Kabul. The soldier next to me didn't make it home. Neither did 2 others in this picture. They died protecting our unit during an ambush, and not one of them stopped to ask about anyone's race, religion, or social status while they were saving lives. The cabin had grown so quiet you could hear the distant hum of the engines. David stared at the photograph, his face unreadable, his earlier bluster faltering in the face of tangible proof of sacrifice. "Now," Leah continued, her voice softening but maintaining its strength, "you have 2 choices. You can continue this confrontation, guarantee yourself a starring role in a viral video about prejudice in America, and likely miss your flight. Or you can take your assigned seat. And perhaps use this time to reflect on why your brother's sacrifice makes you angry at fellow soldiers, rather than proud of what we all stand for." The moment stretched, taut as a tripwire. The other passengers watched, phones still recording, as David Carlson faced a choice that would define him in ways he couldn't yet understand. The tension in the cabin was suddenly broken by violent turbulence. The plane shuddered, overhead bins rattling ominously. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom: "All passengers and crew, please take your seats immediately. We're experiencing severe unexpected turbulence." David Carlson, still standing in the aisle, stumbled. His carefully maintained facade cracked as fear flashed across his face. The plane lurched again, and he grabbed the nearest seat back, knuckles white with panic. Leah's military instincts kicked in instantly. Without hesitation, she reached out to steady him, her grip firm and sure. "Sir, you need to sit down now." Her voice carried the unmistakable authority of command, not asking, but telling. I can't." David's voice had lost all its previous arrogance, replaced by raw fear. "I haven't flown since Jack. Since my brother." His breathing became erratic, the beginning of a panic attack evident in his dilating pupils and trembling hands. The flight attendant, struggling to maintain her balance, looked at Leah with desperate gratitude as the sergeant took control of the situation. "Focus on my voice," Leah commanded, guiding David into the nearest empty seat, ironically, right next to her own. "Breathe with me. In through your nose, out through your mouth. That's an order, sir." The young woman who had been recording earlier called out, "Should I stop filming?" "Put the phone away," Leah replied firmly, never taking her eyes off David. "This isn't entertainment. This is human." As the plane continued to buck and shake, Leah maintained a steady stream of calm instructions, drawing on her experience talking wounded soldiers through pain and fear. "You're safe. The aircraft is designed for this. Focus on my voice. Tell me about Jack." David's eyes snapped to hers, surprise momentarily overriding his panic. "What?" "Your brother. Tell me about him. What unit was he with?" 82nd Airborne, David managed between controlled breaths. He loved it, said it was where he belonged. The 82nd, Leah's voice softened with recognition. "I trained with them at Fort Bragg. Tough unit, proud tradition." The plane hit another patch of rough air. Several passengers gasped. A baby started crying somewhere in the back. David's hand unconsciously gripped Leah's forearm, seeking stability. "Jack used to write home," he continued, words tumbling out now, focus split between his story and his fear. "Said he'd found his real family there, people who didn't care about his Harvard degree or our family name." "That's the military for you," Leah nodded, noting his breathing was steadying. "We don't care where you came from, only where you're willing to go together." The turbulence began to ease, but David kept talking, as if a dam had broken. His last letter. He wrote about this female sergeant who'd saved their unit multiple times, said she was the best soldier he'd ever known, that she'd taught him what real leadership looked like. Leah felt a chill run down her spine. When was Jack stationed in Afghanistan?" "He died 2 years ago, outside Kabul. They said it was quick, that he died saving his unit during an ambush, but they never gave us the full details." The plane finally leveled out. The captain announced they were clear of the turbulence, but Leah barely heard him, her mind racing back to that horrible day, to the ambush that had claimed 3 lives, to the blonde lieutenant who'd pushed her out of the line of fire. "Lieutenant Jack Wilson," she whispered, the name falling from her lips before she could stop it. David's head snapped up, panic attack forgotten. How did you know his full name? Around them, other passengers were settling back into their routines. The flight attendants began their drink service. The young woman with the phone had long since stopped recording, now watching them with a mixture of shame and fascination. Leah reached into her pocket again, hands trembling slightly as she withdrew not the group photo from earlier, but a different one creased and worn from frequent handling. In it, a tall, blonde soldier stood with his arm around her shoulders, both of them grinning despite the dust and exhaustion evident on their faces. "Because," she said softly, holding out the photo, "I was that sergeant. And your brother. Your brother was my friend." David stared at the photo, all color draining from his face. His hands shook as he took it, eyes scanning every detail of his brother's smiling face. "He never told us," David's voice cracked. "In his letters, he never mentioned names, just that there was this sergeant who'd earned his complete trust, who'd shown him what it meant to lead by example, to judge people by their actions, not their." He trailed off, the weight of his earlier behavior crushing down on him. The white-haired woman across the aisle wiped tears from her eyes. Other passengers who had witnessed the entire scene sat in stunned silence, the dramatic irony of the situation not lost on anyone. Leah took a deep breath, steadying herself. "Your brother was a hero, Mr. Carlson. He died saving not just me, but our entire unit. And every day since then I've tried to live up to the example he set, to judge people by their character, to build bridges instead of walls, to face fear with courage and hate with understanding." David began, then stopped, struggling to find words. The man who had been so eloquent in his anger now found himself speechless in the face of grace. "If you'd like," Leah said gently, "I can tell you about that day. About how your brother lived his last moments. About the lives he saved. About the legacy he left. But first I think you need to decide something." "What's that?" David asked, still staring at the photo. "Whether you're going to honor Jack's memory by holding on to anger and prejudice, or by embracing the values he died believing in." The cabin fell silent again, but this time it was a different kind of silence, not the tense quiet of confrontation, but the sacred hush of transformation. As the plane cruised on through clear skies, a story of loss, redemption, and unexpected connections began to unfold at 35,000 feet. Stories like Sergeant Matthews have the power to bridge divides and open hearts. There are more untold tales waiting to be shared. Join our growing family of storytellers and listeners. Subscribe now to be part of this journey of understanding and hope. As the cabin lights dimmed for the late evening flight, Leah withdrew a small notebook from her backpack. The leather cover was worn, its pages filled with thoughts and observations from her deployment. David had fallen into an uneasy sleep beside her, the photo of Jack still clutched in his hands. She uncapped her pen, hesitating for a moment before beginning to write. Dear Mr. Carlson, I've spent hours composing this letter in my mind, trying to find the right words to bridge the gap between us. Not just the gap you saw when you first looked at me, but the deeper one between those who serve and those who wait at home, between those who return and those who return and those who don't. Your brother Jack once told me that the hardest part of being a soldier wasn't facing the enemy, it was explaining the experience to those who'd never worn the uniform. He worried constantly about you know. Said you'd always been his protector, his role model. He feared his death would break something in you. I think he was right. Leah paused, glancing at David's sleeping form. In sleep, the hard lines of anger had softened, revealing the grief beneath. She continued writing. The day we lost Jack started like any other. Standard patrol, routine mission. We'd done it 100 times before. The ambush came from nowhere. They had the high ground, better positions. Jack was manning the rear guard. He shouldn't have even been in the kill zone. I was leading the point team when the first shots rang out. 2 of our youngest soldiers were hit immediately. I remember Jack's voice on the radio, calm as ever. Matthews, get them out. I'll cover you. I argued with him, ordered him to fall back. But Jack just laughed that easy laugh of his and said, "Can't do that, Sarge. Someone's got to be the hero today." Those were his last words to me. Tears blurred Leah's vision, but she forced herself to continue. What you don't know, what wasn't in the official report, is that Jack died protecting more than just his unit. We discovered a hidden group of civilian refugees in the patrol zone, women and children who would have been caught in the crossfire. Your brother didn't hesitate, he provided, covering fire while we evacuated them, drawing enemy attention to his position. He saved 27 lives that day. 27 people who got to go home to their families because your brother believed that every life had value, regardless of where they came from or what they looked like. The plane hit a small pocket of turbulence, causing David to stir briefly. Leah waited until his breathing steadied before continuing. I've carried the weight of that day with me. Not just the loss of a fellow soldier, but the responsibility to honor his sacrifice. Jack believed in a world where people could look past their differences and see each other's humanity. He died protecting that belief. When you confronted me today, I saw in your anger the same pain I've carried. The difference is, I got to see Jack's principles in action every day. I got to witness his unwavering belief that character, not color, determines a person's worth. But you were left with only grief and unanswered questions. It's easier to be angry, isn't it? Easier to build walls than to risk the pain of connecting with others. I understand that now. Leah shifted in her seat, her hand cramping from writing, but she pressed on. There's something else you should know about Jack. The night before that final patrol, we had one of our late-night talks. He showed me a picture of you, the same one he always carried in his helmet. He told me how you'd raised him after your parents died. How you'd sacrificed everything to put him through college. My brother's a good man, he said. Life just hasn't shown him how to trust that goodness in others yet. Jack believed in you, Mr. Carlson. He believed that beneath your protective shell was a heart capable of great compassion. I saw proof of that today during the turbulence, when fear stripped away your defenses and revealed the vulnerable human being beneath. I'm writing this letter not to make you feel guilty or to claim any moral high ground. I'm writing because Jack would have wanted us to find common ground, because he believed that understanding could bridge any divide, heal any wound. A flight attendant passed by, offering water. Leah accepted gratefully, taking a moment to gather her thoughts before concluding. I don't expect this letter to instantly change your views or erase the pain of losing Jack, but I hope it might be a first step towards seeing the world as your brother saw it. A world where uniforms of any color represent service rather than division. Where sacrifice knows no racial bounds, where we honor our fallen by living up to their highest ideals. Jack's last act was to build a bridge between his unit and safety, between those civilians and their future. Perhaps it's time for us to build one too. If you're willing, I'd like to tell you more about your brother. Not just how he died, but how he lived the lives he touched, the differences he made, the legacy he left behind. Because in the end, it's not about my uniform or your prejudices. It's about honoring the man who believed the best about both of us. With respect and hope, Sergeant Leah Matthews. Leah read over the letter one final time, her throat tight with emotion. As she folded the pages carefully, she noticed David stirring, his eyes moving rapidly behind closed lids as if caught in a dream. His fingers had loosened their grip on Jack's photo, and she gently retrieved it, placing it back in her pocket for safekeeping. The city lights far below twinkled like earthbound stars, reminding her of nights in Afghanistan when she and Jack would look up at those same stars, sharing dreams of home and peace. Somehow she felt his presence in that moment, as if he was watching over this unexpected reunion of the two people he'd cared about most. She slipped the letter into an envelope provided by the flight attendant, writing David's name on the front with steady hands. Whatever came next, she had honored both Jack's memory and her own truth. The rest would be up to David. He died protecting them, didn't he? David's voice was barely a whisper, startling Leah. She hadn't realized he was awake. Those civilians you mentioned in your letter, I could hear you writing. Leah turned to face him, noting how the harsh cabin lighting seemed to deepen the lines of grief on his face. Yes, she answered softly. He believed every life was worth saving. David's hands trembled as he reached for the envelope on her tray table. May I? She nodded, watching as he began to read. His expression shifted with each page from defensiveness to surprise, then to pain, and finally to something approaching understanding. When he reached the end, tears were flowing freely down his face. I failed him, David's voice cracked. Everything Jack stood for. I became exactly what he fought against. His shoulders shook with suppressed sobs. After we lost him, I needed someone to blame. The military, the war, anyone but him. Grief does that to us, Leah offered gently. It makes us build walls to protect ourselves from more pain. David pulled out his wallet, extracting a worn piece of paper. His last letter to me, he explained, unfolding it carefully. I've read it so many times, but I never really understood what he was trying to tell me, would you? He held it out to her with trembling hands. Leah took the letter, noting Jack's familiar handwriting. Dear David, if you're reading this, I guess I didn't make it home. Don't worry if it happened for something I believed in. You taught me that, remember? Standing up for what's right, no matter the cost. There's something I need you to know. Out here, I've found what you've been looking for all your life, true brotherhood. Not the kind that comes from sharing blood, but from sharing purpose. My unit. They're family. Every color, every background, but none of that matters when the bullets start flying. Remember how angry you got when I enlisted? You said I was throwing away my Harvard degree, that I was better than this. But big brother, I've never been better than this. Here, I'm just Jack, not the trust fund kid, not the legacy admission, just a soldier trying to make a difference. There's this sergeant in my unit, one of the finest soldiers I've ever known. She's taught me more about leadership, courage, and integrity than 4 years at Harvard ever did. I wish you could meet her. She'd show you what I've learned, that greatness isn't about where you come from, but what you're willing to give. If I don't make it back, promise me something. Don't let grief turn you bitter. Don't let my death become an excuse to close your heart. The world needs more bridges and fewer walls. That's what we're fighting for out here. You've always been my hero, David. Now I need you to be one for others. Love without boundaries, trust without prejudice. Live the way you taught me to before life made you afraid to believe in people again. I love you, big brother. Jack. Leah's voice faltered as she finished reading. The cabin around them had grown quieter, most passengers sleeping or lost in their own worlds. But in the space between their seats, something profound was shifting. He wrote about you, David said wonderingly. All this time, I've been carrying his words about you, never knowing, never wanting to know. And I've been carrying his memory, Leah replied, trying to live up to the faith he had in human goodness. David's hand moved hesitantly toward hers, then stopped. I don't deserve your kindness, not after how I treated you. It's not about deserving, Leah said firmly. It's about choosing to be better. That's what Jack believed in. How do you do it? David asked, genuine curiosity replacing his earlier hostility. How do you face people like me, people who judge you before knowing you and still respond with compassion? Leah considered the question carefully, because every time I'm tempted to respond to hate with hate, I remember soldiers like Jack. They didn't die for us to keep building walls between ourselves. They died believing in something bigger. A moment of understanding passed between them, heavy with the weight of shared loss and newfound connection. David looked down at his brother's letter, then back at Leah. Would you, he hesitated, then pressed on, would you tell me about him? About the Jack you knew? And so, as the plane cruised through the dark sky, Leah began to share stories of Jack, his courage, his humor, his unwavering belief in the goodness of others. She told David about late-night conversations in guard towers, about Jack teaching local children to play baseball, about his dream of starting a foundation to help veterans bridge cultural divides. With each story, she watched the hard shell of prejudice around David's heart crack further, replaced by something new, not just grief or regret, but the first tentative shoots of understanding. He would have loved this, David said finally, gesturing between them. US talking, sharing stories, breaking down barriers. But then maybe that's how we honor him, Leah suggested. By finishing what he started, by building those bridges he believed in. David nodded slowly, then reached into his briefcase and pulled out a business card. I run a non-profit, he explained. We focused mainly on corporate diversity initiatives, but maybe it's time to expand our mission. Would you be interested in helping me develop a program for veteran integration and cross-cultural understanding? It was a small step, but in that moment it felt monumental. Two people who had started the flight as adversaries were now plotting a way to transform their shared loss into something meaningful. As the first hints of dawn began to color the horizon, Leah and David fell into a comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts but connected by the invisible thread of Jack's memory. They had started to build the bridge he had dreamed of, one careful word at a time. While other passengers began stirring with the approaching dawn, David pulled a leather-bound journal from his briefcase. There's something else you should see, he said quietly. Jack's personal journal. I've never been able to bring myself to read it fully, but maybe now is the time. The journal's pages were filled with Jack's distinctive handwriting, interspersed with photographs, sketches and pressed flowers from Afghanistan. Together they began to read. April 15th, 2022. Sarge saved our asses again today. Eyed on the route we usually take to the village, she insisted on changing course, because something felt off. Sure enough, Eud found a daisy chain of explosives. That's the third time her instincts have kept us alive. Some of the guys still grumble about having a female commander. They're idiots. I'd follow her into hell. David's hand trembled as he turned the page. A photo fell out, Leah and Jack, covered in dust, giving thumbs up in front of a newly built school. May 3rd, 2022. Opened the girls' school today. Sarge's pet project. She spent months convincing the local elders building trust. Should have seen her face when those little girls walked in for the first time, carrying their books. She told me later that her mum's a teacher back home. Said education is the best weapon against hatred and fear. Starting to think she's right about a lot of things. Leah remembered that day vividly, the hope in those girls' eyes, Jack's unwavering support, the feeling that they were making a real difference. The next entry made her catch her breath. May 20th, 2022. Had another late-night talk with Sarge. She showed me pictures of her family mom working 2 jobs to make ends meet, little brother fighting some rare disease. She joined up for the medical benefits, stayed because she found her calling. Told her about David, about losing our parents, about how he raised me. She said something that stuck with me: the strongest bridges are built by people who know what it means to cross troubled waters alone. As they read, a flight attendant approached with coffee. She hesitated, noticing the emotional intensity between them, then quietly left the cups and retreated. David took a shaky sip before continuing. June 8th, 2022. Called David today. He's still angry about me enlisting, thinks I'm wasting my potential. Wish he could see what I see here. Wish he could meet Sarge. She reminds me of him before Mum and Dad died, before he started building walls around his heart. Both natural protectors, both so damn stubborn about doing things their way. They'd either kill each other or become best friends. Maybe someday. The entry trailed off, followed by several blank pages, then dated just 2 days before his death. July 15th, 2022. Something feels different. Can't shake this sense of, I don't know, Sarge feels it too. She's been extra vigilant, running additional security checks. Some of the locals warned us about increased Taliban movement in the area. If anything happens, I've updated my letters home. Added a new one for Sarge too. She needs to know what a difference she's made. And one for David. God, I hope he finds his way back to believing in people again. David's coffee went cold, untouched, as they read. The final entry was dated the morning of the ambush. July 17th, 2022. Dawn patrol in an hour. Sarge is triple-checking everyone's gear, doing that thing where she tries to hide her concern. She's got good instincts if she's worried. We all should be. But here's the thing about serving under Sergeant Matthews: you know that no matter what happens, she'll move heaven and earth to get her people home. And if she can't, well, then it was worth dying for something she believed in. David, if you ever read this, she's the best of us. What we do here, the lives we save, the bridges we build, it matters. Don't let my death become another wall in your heart. Let it be a bridge to understanding what I learned here, that courage, honor, and sacrifice know no color, no creed, no boundaries. Love you, big brother. See you on the other side. The last page held a photograph Leah had never seen: she and Jack sitting on a wall at sunset, deep in conversation. On the back he'd written, "The sister I found, teaching the brother I love about what really matters." David closed the journal slowly, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Around them the cabin had come fully awake, but they remained in their bubble of shared grief and discovery. He knew, David whispered. Somehow he knew you two would meet someday. Jack always did see things the rest of us missed, Leah replied softly. He had a way of understanding connections before they happened. David pulled out his phone, opened his gallery, and showed Leah a video clip. This was from his last leave. I was giving him grief about re-enlisting. The video played, showing Jack in civilian clothes, passionate and animated. You don't get it, David. Out there, we're building something bigger than ourselves. Sergeant Matthews, she's showing us how to bridge worlds. Remember how you used to talk about changing the system from within? That's what we're doing, one village, one school, one connection at a time. The video Jack's voice continued over images of humanitarian missions, school openings, and joint patrols. You taught me to stand up for what's right. Well, this is right. And someday, brother, you'll understand. Someday you'll see what I see." As the video ended, David turned to Leah with newfound purpose in his eyes. I think I finally do see it, and I think I know how to honor his memory properly." He pulled out his tablet, opening a document titled Wilson Foundation Draft Proposal had been sitting on his inheritance, unable to decide what to do with it. But now he began typing rapidly. Mission statement: the Jack Wilson Memorial Foundation dedicates itself to building bridges between military and civilian communities, focusing on cross-cultural understanding, veteran support, and educational initiatives in conflict zones. Looking up at Leah, he asked, "Would you help me build this? Not just as a consultant, but as a partner. Jack trusted your judgment, your vision. I'd like to do the same." Before Leah could respond, the young woman who had been recording earlier approached their seats hesitantly. I need to apologize," she said, her phone clutched guiltily in her hand. "I uploaded that video of your confrontation, but I'd like to upload this too." She held up her phone, showing a new recording of their current conversation. "People need to see this part too, how understanding can triumph over prejudice, how loss can lead to connection." David and Leah exchanged glances, years of pain and possibility passing between them in that look. Finally, Leah nodded. "Share it," she said. "Jack would have wanted his story to build bridges, not walls." The video spread faster than anyone could have anticipated. By the time their plane began its descent into Chicago, First Class Redemption was trending alongside First Class Racist. The internet had divided into fierce camps, each spinning their own narrative of the encounter. Leah's phone buzzed constantly with notifications. Her military colleagues were sending messages of support, but also warnings. "Be careful," Maria texted. "Not everyone wants a happy ending to this story. Some people prefer their villains to stay villains." She was right. As David scrolled through his own phone, his face darkened. "My board members are having a field day with this," he muttered. "Half of them think I've lost my mind, betraying my principles as they call them. The other half are scrambling to spin this as a planned diversity initiative." A news alert popped up on both their phones. Viral first-class confrontation takes unexpected turn. Soldier and racist executive share hidden connection. "They're missing the point," David said, frustration evident in his voice. "This isn't about PR or politics. It's about Jack, about what he believed in." The flight attendant who had helped them earlier leaned in. "I hate to interrupt, but you should know there's media waiting at the gate. Someone tipped them off." Leah felt her military training kick in. "We need a plan," she said, shifting into tactical mode. "This story's bigger than us now." David nodded, then hesitated. "My company's PR team is already calling. They want to manage the narrative, make this into some feel-good corporate story about redemption and second chances." "And my commanding officer just texted," Leah added. "The military wants to use this as a recruitment story. Breaking barriers in uniform or something similar." The young woman with the phone, they'd learned her name was Sarah, spoke up from across the aisle. "Maybe that's not a bad thing. Your story could help change minds." "Or it could become another weapon in the culture wars," Leah countered. "I've seen too many real stories get twisted into political ammunition." David was quiet for a moment, reading Jack's journal again. "You know what Jack would say? He'd say we're thinking too small. He'd want us to use this moment to do something real, something lasting." He turned to Leah, eyes alight with purpose. "What if we refused to let anyone else control this narrative? What if we told the whole story, not just about today, but about Jack, about Afghanistan, about all the bridges that need building?" "A book?" Leah asked. "More than that. A movement. The foundation we talked about, it could be the platform for real change. Not just diversity seminars and veteran programs, but actual bridge-building work. Schools in conflict zones, cultural exchange programs, support for military families." As they discussed possibilities, their phones kept buzzing. messages were pouring in. From veterans sharing similar stories of prejudice and reconciliation. From military families who'd lost loved ones, seeking ways to honor their memories. From corporate executives admitting their own biases and asking how to change. From students wanting to start dialogue programs in their schools. But there were also darker messages. The threats from extremists who saw David as a traitor to their cause. Accusations from skeptics claiming the whole thing was staged. Demands from media outlets for exclusive rights to their story. Warnings from both their professional circles about potential backlash. "It won't be easy," Leah said, reading a particularly harsh comment. "Some people invest heavily in keeping those walls up." "Nothing worthwhile is," David replied. He showed her another entry from Jack's journal. "The hardest bridges to build are the ones people don't think they need." The captain announced their final approach to Chicago. As the plane descended, Leah and David found themselves facing a crucial decision: how to step off this plane into a world that was waiting to turn their personal moment of transformation into something else entirely. "Whatever we decide," Leah said firmly, "we do it on our terms. For Jack." "For Jack," David agreed. "And for everyone else who's given their life believing in a world with fewer walls and more bridges." Sarah leaned forward again. "I can help. I work in social media management. Let me help you tell this story the right way." Other passengers began offering support too. A law professor offered pro bono legal advice for setting up the foundation. A retired journalist volunteered to help craft their message. A tech executive proposed creating a platform for sharing similar stories of transformation. As the plane touched down, David turned to Leah, ready to face the cameras. Leah thought of all the battles she'd fought, all the bridges she'd helped build in war-torn lands. This was different, not a physical battlefield, but perhaps an equally important one. "On condition," she said, pulling out Jack's journal. "We read his words. Let Jack's vision be our shield against whatever's waiting out there." David nodded, understanding perfectly. They had started this flight as adversaries, transformed into allies, and would walk off as partners in a mission bigger than either of them had imagined. The seatbelt sign dinged off. As passengers began gathering their belongings, many stopped to offer words of support or simply shake their hands. The white-haired woman who had tried to defend Leah earlier pressed a business card into her hand. "My husband and I run an educational foundation. Call us when you're ready to start building those schools." The plane had become more than just a vessel of transportation. It had become the birthplace of something profound. As they prepared to step into the media circus waiting outside, Leah and David knew that the real journey, the one Jack had dreamed of, was just beginning. As they stepped into the terminal, camera flashes erupted like artillery fire. Reporters surged forward, microphones thrust like weapons. But before either Leah or David could speak, a voice cut through the chaos. "Sergeant Matthews." Through the crowd came a man in a wheelchair wearing a Marine Corps veteran's cap. Behind him, a group of uniformed service members formed a protective barrier between the media and Leah's path. "Colonel Chen," Leah breathed, recognizing her former commander. "I didn't expect." "When the video went viral, we mobilized," he said simply. "But that's not why I'm here." His face was grave. "There's something you both need to know about July 17th, 2022. David stiffened beside her. The colonel pulled out a classified folder, its edges worn. "This was above your clearance level, Sergeant. But given the circumstances," he handed her the file, "it's time you knew the whole truth about the day we lost Lieutenant Wilson." With trembling hands, Leah opened the folder. Inside were satellite images, intelligence reports, and a final mission report marked top secret. "The ambush wasn't random," Colonel Chen said quietly. We had intelligence about a high-value target in the area. Jack was briefed separately that morning. David leaned in, his shoulder touching Leah's as they read. The documents revealed a devastating truth. Jack had known about the trap. The intelligence suggested Taliban forces were using the civilian refugees as bait, expecting American forces to attempt a rescue. He volunteered. Colonel Chen continued, said his unit's regular patrol route would make the perfect cover for getting those civilians out. He knew it was likely a one-way mission. Leah's vision blurred as she read Jack's personal mission statement, written hours before the ambush. Request permission to lead extraction team. Sergeant Matthews' unit provides ideal cover for civilian evacuation. Note: Matthews must not be informed of true mission parameters. Her ethical commitment to leave no one behind would compromise operational security. I accept full responsibility for this deception and any consequences thereof. David's hand found hers, gripping tight as they continued reading. The report detailed how Jack had orchestrated the entire operation, deliberately positioning himself to draw enemy fire away from both the civilians and Leah's unit. He knew, Leah whispered, memories flooding back. That's why he countermanded my order to fall back. He wasn't just being heroic, he was following his own mission. The colonel nodded. The intelligence indicated that if we didn't get those civilians out that day, they would have been executed as examples. Children included. Jack couldn't let that happen. But why keep it from me? Leah demanded, military discipline cracking under the weight of revelation. I could have helped, could have planned better, could have. Because he knew you'd try to save everyone, David interrupted softly, understanding dawning in his eyes. Including him. He couldn't risk it. The mission had to come first. Colonel Chen pulled out one final document, a letter in Jack's handwriting, dated the morning of his death. If you're reading this, the mission succeeded, but I didn't make it. That's acceptable. What matters is that those civilians are safe and our unit, especially Sergeant Matthews, survived. She'll blame herself, make sure she knows the truth. I chose this. David will blame the military, maybe even blame her. He'll need to know that this wasn't about following orders, it was about living up to the principles he taught me. About protecting those who can't protect themselves, regardless of who they are or where they're from. I've learned something vital serving under Sergeant Matthews. True strength isn't in the walls we build to protect ourselves, but in the bridges we build to protect others. She showed me that every day, though she never knew she was teaching it. God to my brother, find her. Learn from her. She embodies everything you once believed in, everything you taught me before grief made you forget. Let my death be a bridge, not a barrier. To my sergeant, lead with the same courage and compassion that inspired me to follow. Don't let my choice become your burden. You showed me what true leadership looks like, putting others before yourself, seeing the humanity in every soul, building bridges in a world determined to build walls. Together, you're my legacy. Make it count. Lieutenant Jack Wilson, 82nd Airborne Division. The terminal had grown quiet, the reporters lowering their cameras in response to the gravity of the moment. David stood frozen, tears streaming down his face as 22 months of misdirected anger crumbled in the face of his brother's final testimony. He played us, Leah said softly, a mix of admiration and grief in her voice. Even in death, he found a way to build one final bridge. Colonel Chen cleared his throat. There's more. Those civilians Jack died saving? They made it to America last month. They've been asking to meet the family of the soldier who gave his life for them. They're here now, if you're ready. Through the parting crowd came a group of people, women in hijabs, children clutching books, elderly men leaning on canes, 27 faces, each bearing the solemn weight of survival. At their head walked a teenage girl, perhaps 16, carrying a worn backpack with an American flag patch. I am Amira, she said in careful English. Lieutenant Wilson saved my life, and yours, she added, looking directly at Leah. The girl opened her backpack and withdrew a piece of paper, yellowed and creased. He wrote this during the firefight. Asked me to keep it safe, to deliver it if I made it to America. Her voice trembled. He said, "Give this to the brave sergeant and my brother if you find them together." David and Leah stood shoulder to shoulder as Amira unfolded the note. Jack's hurried handwriting was barely legible, written under fire in his final moments. "If you're reading this, the mission succeeded better than I hoped. Leah, David, you're together, which means something broke down the walls between you. Good. That's exactly what I prayed would happen. Amira here is special. She reminds me of both of you, David's protective instincts, Leah's fierce determination. She was teaching other girls to read right under the Taliban's nose. Her students are among those we're saving today. Here's what you don't know yet. This mission wasn't just about saving lives. It's about saving what we believe in. These people, they're bridge builders too. Teachers, doctors, community leaders who refuse to bow to hatred and fear. David, remember when you used to say education was the key to changing the world? Amira has a scholarship offer from your alma mater, Harvard. Yeah, I arranged that too. She'll need a guardian, a mentor. Think you can handle that, big brother? Leah, that school project you started here? Amira can help you expand it. She knows how to build bridges between cultures because she's lived on both sides of the divide. The bullets are getting closer. Time's almost up. But maybe that's okay. Maybe my job was just to keep these bridge builders alive long enough to meet each other. To help you both remember what you're fighting for. Remember what Dad used to say, death ends a life, not a relationship. Make this relationship count. I love you both. Jack. As David finished reading aloud, his voice breaking, Amira stepped forward. From her backpack, she pulled out more items, drawings from children Jack had taught English to, letters from families he'd helped, photos of him playing soccer with local kids. He told a story, she said, about his brave sergeant who taught him to see beyond uniforms and borders, about his brother who taught him to stand up for what's right. He said together you could change the world. We believed him. The other refugees stepped forward, each carrying something to share. A woman offered a hand-woven scarf she'd made while hiding from the Taliban. An old man presented a family Quran, saved from their destroyed village. A small boy held up a drawing of Jack, standing with Leah, protecting a group of children. The media cameras were rolling again, but nobody seemed to notice. This wasn't about viral videos or public redemption anymore. This was about fulfilling a legacy that had been orchestrated by a man who saw bridges where others saw only walls. Colonel Chen wheeled forward. There's one more thing. The Pentagon has approved a joint initiative between the military and civilian sectors for cultural education and conflict resolution. They want to call it the Wilson Initiative, but they want both of you to lead it. David looked at Leah, then at Amira, then back at the colonel. Jack knew, didn't he? He knew this would happen. All of it. Your brother was one of the finest strategic minds I've ever encountered, the colonel replied. He understood that sometimes the greatest battles aren't won with weapons, but with wisdom, and sometimes the strongest bridges are built by joining unlikely allies. Leah stepped forward, military bearing straight but eyes soft with emotion. Mr. Carlson, David, I think it's time we honored Jack's legacy properly. Not just with a foundation or an initiative, but with real action. These people, their stories, their courage, this is what Jack died protecting. This is what he wanted us to continue. David nodded, turning to Amira. Would you really accept me as a guardian, after how I acted on that plane? Amira smiled, wise beyond her years. Lieutenant Wilson said you would ask that. He also said to tell you the greatest strength is admitting when we're wrong. The greatest courage is choosing to change. The reporters had fallen silent, their cameras capturing something far more powerful than the scandal they'd come expecting. This wasn't just about a racist redemption or a soldier's forgiveness. This was about the power of one man's sacrifice to transform lives across continents and cultures. David turned to address the cameras directly for the first time. My brother died building bridges between worlds. I dishonored his sacrifice by building walls instead. Today, that changes. Today, we announce the Jack Wilson Global Bridge Builders Initiative. Not just a foundation, but a movement. We'll start with Amira and her fellow refugees. But we won't stop there. Leah joined him, adding, "This isn't about erasing differences or forgetting the past. It's about learning from each other, about seeing the humanity in those we once considered other, just as Lieutenant Wilson taught us." The colonel cleared his throat. "There's a military transport flying out to Kabul next week. The Wilson Initiative's first project could be that school you started, Sergeant Matthews. These people," he gestured to the refugees, "they could help build the curriculum, teach the teachers." Build the bridges, David finished, understanding at last what his brother had died believing in. The media circus eventually dispersed, but a deeper, more personal reckoning awaited in a quiet conference room at O'Hare. Colonel Chen had arranged the space, away from prying eyes, for Amira to share one final piece of Jack's legacy, his personal tablet, preserved through the ambush. He gave it to me minutes before Amira's voice faltered. Said if anything happened, the password was Bridge Builder 1983, his brother's birthday. As David unlocked the tablet with trembling fingers, a video began playing automatically. Jack's face filled the screen, filmed in the pre-dawn light of his last day. "Hey David, Sergeant Matthews. If you're watching this, then Operation Bridge Builder worked, but I didn't make it. And yeah, that was the actual mission name. Someone up there has a sense of irony." Jack looked exhausted but determined, his usual easy smile replaced by solemn purpose. "There's something I never told either of you. The night before I deployed, I went to the Pentagon Memorial. Sat there thinking about how one act of hatred creates so many walls between people. That's when I knew what I had to do with my life." He paused, looking off camera before continuing. "David, remember when Dad died? You told me sometimes a single death can change the world. You meant it as a warning, taught me to build walls to protect myself. But what if a single death could change the world for the better? What if it could build bridges instead?" Tears streamed down David's face as his brother's final confession unfolded. "I've been coordinating with intelligence, setting this up for months. These refugees, they're not just civilians. They're teachers, doctors, community leaders. People who've been secretly fighting extremism through education and understanding. The Taliban figured it out, planned to make examples of them." Jack's image leaned closer to the camera. "Sergeant Matthews, Leah, you taught me that true leadership means being willing to sacrifice everything for what's right. That's why I couldn't tell you about the mission. You would have found another way, tried to save everyone. Sometimes one life has to be traded for many." The video shook as distant explosions sounded. Jack looked over his shoulder before turning back. "David, I know you'll be angry. You'll want to blame the military, blame Leah, blame the world. Don't. This was my choice. Remember when you raised me after Mom and Dad died? You showed me what sacrifice for others looked like. I learned it from you first." He pulled out a worn photo, a young David holding baby Jack. "You gave up your youth to raise me. Mom and Dad gave up their lives protecting others in that embassy attack. Leah risks her life daily building bridges in war zones. I'm just following the family tradition." Another explosion, closer this time. Jack's voice became urgent. "There's more to tell, but time's running out. Check the tablet's files. Everything's there, the foundation plans, the scholarship programs, the school initiatives. I've spent months setting it up. Amira knows the details." His face filled with emotion. "David, remember how you were before Mom and Dad died? How you believed in changing the world through understanding. Find that person again. Leah can help. She's who you used to be, who you can be again." The sound of helicopter rotors grew louder. Jack looked up, then back at the camera. "One last thing in my quarters, there's a journal. Colonel Chen knows where. It's not just a diary, it's a roadmap. I've spent months documenting everything, the people who need help, the bridges that need building, the walls that need to come down. Use it." Jack's voice cracked slightly. "David, you were the best big brother anyone could ask for. You taught me about sacrifice, about standing up for what's right. Forgive yourself for forgetting those lessons. It's time to remember. Leah, you showed me what those principles look like in action. Take care of him, he's better than he remembers being." The sounds of combat grew closer. Jack straightened, his face setting into familiar determination. "If I don't make it, make my death mean something. Not as a wall between cultures, but as a bridge. Everything I've planned, everyone I've connected, it's all there in the files. The foundation, the schools, the scholarships, it's ready. Just needs you two to build it." His final words came with a sad smile. "Dad used to say death ends a life, not a relationship. This isn't an ending, it's a beginning. Time to go save some lives and build some bridges. I love you both. Make it count." The video ended. David sat frozen, one hand still touching his brother's image on the screen. Leah stood behind him, her hand on his shoulder, both of them processing the weight of Jack's deliberate sacrifice. "He planned everything," David whispered. "His own death, our meeting, all of it. Because he knew what it would take to break down the walls," Leah replied softly. "He gave his life not just to save those refugees, but to save me." David finished, understanding finally crushing him. "To save who I used to be." The cost of Jack's bridge had been calculated, deliberate, and devastating. But as they would soon discover, it was only part of the price that had been paid that day. In the conference room, Amira stepped forward with one final revelation. "There's something else," she said quietly. "Something Lieutenant Wilson made me promise to tell only if I saw true change in both of you." She pulled out a crumpled letter, different from the others. The paper was stained with blood. "He wrote this during the firefight, after he was hit the first time. Before she swallowed hard, before he made his final stand." Leah took the letter with trembling hands, recognizing the shaky handwriting. "David, Leah, if Amira's giving you this, it means the impossible happened. You've both changed enough to deserve the whole truth. The hardest truth. I wasn't the only one who died that day. Sergeant Rodriguez, Chen, Murphy, they were part of it. They volunteered when I told them the stakes. 27 lives against our own. They didn't hesitate. Maria Rodriguez had just gotten engaged. John Chen's wife was pregnant. Kevin Murphy's daughter had just started walking. They knew what they were giving up. They chose it anyway. David, remember how you said the military takes everything? You were wrong. We give. We give. We give because some things are worth dying for. Leah, I know you've carried guilt about not saving them. Let it go. We chose this. All of us. The official report lists us as killed in action during an ambush. That's true, but incomplete. We walked into that ambush knowing what waited, because those 27 lives represented something bigger: hope, education, change. Each of those refugees carries a piece of us now. Maria's unborn child will have a namesake in Amira's sister. John's medical knowledge lives on in 2 refugee doctors. Kevin's love of teaching continues through 3 escaped educators. We didn't just die, we multiplied. Each life we saved carries our dream forward. But here's the hardest part: there were others we couldn't save. People who believed in bridges instead of walls, who died building them. Their names are in my journal: teachers, doctors, peacemakers. Their deaths can't be for nothing. This is what I need you to understand. Building bridges costs more than money or programs. Sometimes it costs everything, but the cost of not building them is even higher. The others wrote letters too. They're with Colonel Chen, letters to their families explaining their choice, supporting what we're trying to build here. Don't let their sacrifices become just another statistic, another reason for people to build walls. Make them count, make them matter. The blood on this paper is mine, but the sacrifice belongs to all of us. Honor it. With my last breath. Jack. David's hands shook as he finished reading. 4 of them, he whispered. 4 families destroyed because the world needed this lesson. Leah's military composure cracked. I led that patrol. They were under my command. All this time I thought I'd failed them. No, Amira interrupted firmly. They succeeded. Through us, she gestured to her fellow refugees. We carry their dreams, their knowledge, their hope. We are their bridges. Colonel Chen wheeled forward again. There's more, he said heavily. Each of those soldiers left something behind. Maria's fiancé started a scholarship fund. John's widow began a medical outreach program. Kevin's wife created a teaching fellowship. They're all waiting for what you'll build with their sacrifices. The weight of responsibility settled over the room like a heavy shroud. This wasn't just about Jack anymore. It was about 4 families shattered, 4 lives given, 4 sacrifices made in the name of building bridges. How do we honor this? David asked, his voice raw. How do we make it enough? Leah stood straighter, military bearing returning as she found her purpose. We honor it by building bridges strong enough to carry their weight, by making sure their sacrifice creates change that lasts. Amira touched the blood-stained letter gently. Lieutenant Wilson said something to me just before. He said, the greatest tragedy isn't dying for what you believe in. It's living without believing in anything. The truth of their task lay before them, not just to build bridges, but to make them worth the profound cost of their foundation. 4 lives given, 27 saved, and countless more waiting to be transformed by what would rise from this sacrifice. The tragedy wasn't just in the lives lost, but in the responsibility their deaths placed on the living. Every bridge they would build would need to be worthy of the blood that purchased its possibility. There's something else you need to see, Colonel Chen said, signaling to an aide who had been waiting quietly in the corner. The aide wheeled in a small footlocker, military issue, with Jack's name stenciled on the side. This arrived from Afghanistan yesterday. We've been waiting for the right moment. Inside was a laptop, sealed in an evidence bag, along with dozens of carefully organized files. But it was a leather-bound book that caught David's attention, not Jack's journal, but something older, more worn. That's David's voice faltered. That's Dad's diplomatic journal. With trembling hands, he opened it. Their father had been a career diplomat, killed alongside their mother in an embassy bombing years ago. The journal was his record of peace negotiations, bridges built between warring factions. But there, in the margins, were Jack's notes dated just weeks before his death. Dad wasn't just a diplomat. Found his classified files, he was part of a network. People dedicated to building peace through education, understanding. The embassy bombing wasn't random. They were targeted because they were bridge builders. David doesn't know. He thought it was just a terrorist attack. He built walls to protect us both. But Dad was carrying on a legacy. Now it's my turn. Leah leaned in, recognizing names in the journal. These people. Some of them worked with my father before he died. He was a community organizer in Chicago, building programs to bridge racial divides. Another document fell from the journal, a yellowed newspaper clipping about a Chicago youth program. In the photo, a young David Carlson stood with Leah's father, both smiling as they inaugurated a cross-cultural education initiative. I remember this, David whispered. It was before Mum and Dad died. Before I changed. Amira stepped forward, adding another piece to the puzzle. Lieutenant Wilson showed me this. Said it was his inspiration. She pointed to the photo. He said his brother once knew how to build bridges, and his sergeant's father showed him how. The connection spiraled deeper. Jack's laptop revealed years of research, tracking the interconnected web of people working across borders, cultures, and conflicts to build understanding. David and Leah's fathers had been part of the same international peace-building network. The refugee families they'd saved were connected to that same network. Jack had spent months documenting these connections, preparing for a moment he knew would come. Colonel Chen added the final revelation. Jack wasn't just building a foundation. He was rebuilding a network that was shattered 20 years ago. A network your fathers helped create. David sank into a chair, overwhelmed. All this time, I thought I was honoring Dad by protecting us from the world, but I was betraying everything he lived for. Leah's military training couldn't prevent her voice from shaking. My father never told me about this. He died when I was young, heart attack, we thought. But these files... Your fathers were heroes, Amira said softly. Not just for how they died, but for how they lived. Lieutenant Wilson understood that. He wanted you both to understand it too. The colonel wheeled forward, laying out more documents. The Wilson Initiative isn't new. It's a revival. Your fathers called it Project Bridge. It operated in 30 countries, built schools in conflict zones, created exchange programs, trained peace builders. Until the embassy bombing, David finished, understanding dawning. Until fear won. Jack wanted to restart it, Leah said, reading through the files. But he knew it would take both of us. The military experience, the corporate connections. The missing pieces of a broken bridge, Amira added. He said you would understand when you were ready. David picked up his father's journal again, reading an entry from 20 years ago. Met with James Matthews today. His work in Chicago proves what we've always believed, that understanding can't be bombed or bullied into existence. It must be built connection by connection, story by story. His daughter and my sons give me hope. The next generation of bridge builders. Leah found her own father's corresponding notes in the files. David Carlson shows remarkable insight for a teenager. Like his father, he sees beyond surface differences to underlying connections. His young brother Jack watches him with hero worship. These boys and my Leah, they could finish what we've started. The weight of legacy, responsibility, and revelation filled the room. Jack hadn't just died building a bridge. He had died rebuilding a bridge that fear and grief had destroyed 20 years earlier. He knew, David said softly. He knew everything. About Dad's work, about your father, about who I used to be. And who we could be again, Leah finished. Together. The truth lay spread before them, not just about Jack's sacrifice, but about a generation's long struggle between those who would build walls and those who would build bridges. They were never meant to be enemies. They were meant to be partners, carrying forward a legacy bigger than their personal pain. The conference room door opened, revealing an unexpected group, families of the other fallen soldiers, led by Maria Rodriguez's fiancé and John Chen's widow, now visibly pregnant. We've been waiting, Maria's fiancé, Michael said quietly, waiting for you both to be ready for the whole truth. Sarah Chen, John's wife, stepped forward, cradling her belly. Our spouses did more than die in an ambush. They died rebuilding something beautiful, something both your fathers gave their lives protecting. From her bag she withdrew more letters, dozens of them, from soldiers and civilians across the globe, each connected to the original Project Bridge. It wasn't just your fathers, Michael explained. The network included hundreds of people. Teachers, doctors, diplomats, soldiers, all working together, crossing borders, building understanding, until fear and hatred started targeting them. A fresh wave of understanding crashed over David. The embassy bombing that killed our parents. It wasn't random. No, Colonel Chen confirmed. They were targeted precisely because they were successful, because bridges threaten those who profit from division. Sarah touched her stomach gently. John knew the risks, they all did, but they also knew that the cost of not building bridges was even higher. The young woman from the plane, who had recorded everything, stepped forward again. But this time she wasn't holding a phone. Instead, she held out a press badge. "My name isn't just Sarah," she said. "I'm Sarah Wilson Chen. John and Jack saved my father in Afghanistan 15 years ago. They inspired me to become a journalist, to tell stories that build bridges instead of walls." The connections kept unfurling, revealing a tapestry of lives intertwined across decades. The flight attendant who had defended Leah was the daughter of a Project Bridge teacher. The elderly couple who had witnessed their confrontation were former peace negotiators. Even the airline's decision to upgrade Leah had been quietly orchestrated by network members. "Your meeting wasn't chance," Michael explained. Jack spent his final months rebuilding these connections, preparing for this moment. He knew it would take something dramatic to break through the walls grief had built. Sarah Chen opened her laptop, showing them a private website, a digital network of bridge builders that had operated silently for years, waiting for the right time to resurface. "Project Bridge never really died," she said. "It just went underground, waiting for the next generation to be ready." "Waiting for you?" David stared at the screen, recognizing names and faces people he'd done business with, never knowing they were part of his father's legacy. All this time, they were watching, waiting. "Building bridges takes more than good intentions," Colonel Chen said. "It takes strategy, patience, and perfect timing." Jack understood that. He knew the viral video would attract attention, but the real work would happen here, in this room, when you were both ready to see the bigger picture. Leah, her military mind racing, started connecting dots. The foundation Jack planned. It's not just about scholarships and schools, is it? It's about bringing Project Bridge back into the light, Michael confirmed. Using modern tools, social media, corporate partnerships, military connections, everything both of you can bring to the table. Amira stepped forward again. "Those of us he saved, we're not just refugees. We're the children and grandchildren of original Project Bridge members. We carry their knowledge, their connections, their dreams." The truth settled over the room like a mantle of responsibility and possibility. Jack hadn't just orchestrated a personal reconciliation, he had engineered the rebirth of a global movement. David turned to Leah, seeing her not just as a soldier he had wronged, but as a partner in something far bigger than either of them had imagined. 20 years ago, he said slowly, fear and hatred tried to destroy this network. They killed our fathers, scattered the members, and made me build walls instead of bridges. But they failed. Leah finished, because even buried under fear and grief, the foundation remained, waiting for us to rediscover it. Sarah Wilson Chen held up her phone one last time, but not to record. Instead, she showed them a live feed of people gathering outside the airport, students, veterans, teachers, activists, all holding signs. But bridges, not walls. Project Bridge Lives. Wilson's dream. Unite the builders. "The world is ready," she said simply. "The question is, are you?" David looked at his father's journal, then at Jack's plans, then at the gathering crowd outside. 20 years of misdirected grief and anger began to transform into purposeful resolve. Leah stood at parade rest, her military bearing now carrying the weight not just of command, but of legacy. "Jack knew," she said softly. "He knew we'd need all of this, the viral video, the dramatic confrontation, the painful revelations to break down the walls grief had built. And to show us," David added, "that the bridges are still there. They just need to be rebuilt. 1 year later, the Wilson Global Bridge Builders Initiative headquarters bustled with activity. The gleaming building, once David's corporate office, had been transformed into a hub of international cooperation. The main lobby featured a wall of photographs, Jack Wilson at its center, surrounded by images of bridge builders past and present. David and Leah's fathers smiled from old photographs, while newer images showed the growing network of their legacy. Amira, now a Harvard sophomore, leading a student exchange program. Sarah Chen cradling her newborn son, named Jack, while reporting from a newly opened school in Kabul. The original viral video playing on a loop, now a powerful reminder of how walls can become bridges. David and Leah, standing with refugees, veterans, and corporate leaders at the initiative's launch. David stood before the wall, straightening his father's photograph. His transformation was visible. Gone was the angry executive in an expensive suit. Instead, he wore casual clothes and a Project Bridge pin, his face bearing the serene purpose of a man who had found his true calling. "The new school opens next week," Leah said, approaching in her dress uniform. She'd remained in the military, using her position to build bridges between military and civilian communities. Jack's vision keeps growing. 20 schools in 12 countries, David nodded. And that's just the beginning. The corporate network's expanding, 30 companies now offering internships to refugee students. The lobby doors opened as Amira entered, leading a group of exchange students. Her presence was a daily reminder of what Jack had died, protecting the power of education to transform lives. Professor Carlson, she called out. David had started teaching part-time at Harvard, sharing lessons about corporate responsibility and cross-cultural understanding. The new scholarship recipients are here. The students filed in, their diverse faces reflecting Jack's dream. Each wore a badge with a bridge symbol and carried a tablet loaded with Project Bridge's educational resources. "Welcome to your new home," David greeted them warmly. "You're part of something bigger than yourself now." Leah stepped forward, her sergeant's authority softened by genuine warmth. "Each of you represents hope. Hope that understanding can triumph over fear. Hope that bridges can be stronger than walls." The original letter Jack had written them was framed nearby, its blood-stained paper preserved behind glass, not as a reminder of loss, but as testimony to the power of purposeful sacrifice. Colonel Chen, now a key advisor to the initiative, wheeled up to the group. The Pentagon's approved the expansion, he announced. The Wilson Protocol will be standard training for all deploying units, teaching soldiers to be bridge builders, not just warriors. Sarah Wilson Chen, her press credentials now bearing both Project Bridge and her network logo, was filming the gathering. Her reporting had helped shift the narrative around refugees and cross-cultural understanding, one story at a time. The network stronger than ever, she reported quietly to David and Leah. Active in 43 countries now. Jack would be proud. He knew, David said softly. Somehow he knew this would work. That his death could build something greater than his life. Leah touched Jack's photo gently. Not his death, she corrected. His choice. His belief in the power of connection. The students gathered around the wall of photographs, asking questions about the history they were now part of. Amira stood among them, a living bridge between worlds, her presence a testament to the value of a single life given in service of understanding. David watched them, remembering how he'd once built walls to protect himself from pain. Now he built bridges to protect others from isolation and fear. Leah's phone buzzed, another request for the initiative's help, another opportunity to expand the network, another bridge waiting to be built. "Ready?" she asked David. He nodded, touching his father's photograph one last time. "Always, we have work to do." Together they moved forward to greet the new generation of bridge builders, carrying forward a legacy that had been purchased with blood but would be sustained by hope. The walls that grief had built lay shattered behind them. Ahead stretched an endless horizon of bridges waiting to be built. As evening fell over the Wilson Initiative headquarters, David and Leah found themselves back in the conference room where they'd first learned the full truth of Jack's sacrifice. But now the room buzzed with purpose as they led their weekly global network meeting. On screens around the world, faces appeared: bridge builders from every continent, a teacher in Afghanistan using Jack's curriculum, a corporate leader in Japan implementing refugee employment programs, a military commander in Europe adapting the Wilson Protocol, Amira's sister running the first girls' school in her village. The 5th anniversary of the Wilson Initiative approaches. David began, his voice carrying the quiet confidence of a man who had found his true north. Jack's legacy has grown beyond anything we imagined. The statistics told part of the story: 50,000 students educated through bridge schools, 1,000 refugees placed in corporate positions, 100 military units trained in cultural bridge building, countless lives transformed. But the real story was in the faces: the children who now saw hope where there had been only walls, the veterans who found purpose in building peace, the communities that learned to embrace rather than fear difference. Leah, now a lieutenant colonel, shared the military's latest adoption of the Wilson Protocol. Every soldier becomes a potential bridge builder, she explained. We're changing the definition of victory. As the meeting concluded, Sarah Wilson Chen's young son Jack could be heard crying in the background of her video feed. The next generation of bridge builders was already growing up in a world where walls were meant to be transformed, not fortified. After the calls ended, David and Leah walked to the roof garden, a space dedicated to quiet reflection. The Chicago skyline glittered before them, while behind them stood a simple marble monument to those who died building bridges. They saw tomorrow's hope through today's pain. Their sacrifice lights our path. The names of all the fallen bridge builders were engraved below, starting with their fathers and ending with Jack and his fellow soldiers. But the monument wasn't just about loss. Climbing vines and flowering plants grew around it, symbolizing how life and hope could spring from sacrifice. Sometimes, David said quietly, I wonder if Jack can see what his choice created. Not just the schools and programs, but the change in hearts. Leah smiled, touching the sergeant's stripes she still wore proudly. He sees. Every time a wall comes down, every time understanding replaces fear, he sees. The door opened as Amira joined them, now a poised Harvard senior preparing to lead the initiative's next generation. The new applications are in, she announced. 10,000 students applying for bridge schools. Hope is contagious. David wrapped an arm around her shoulder. She had become the daughter he never had, living proof that love could transcend boundaries of blood and culture. You know what Jack would say, Leah mused, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors of promise. Keep building, David and Amira answered together, sharing a knowing smile. As night fell over Chicago, lights began appearing in the initiative building's windows, the night shift of global coordinators maintaining connections across time zones. The work of bridge building never really stopped. A text buzzed on their phones. Sarah Chen's newborn daughter had just arrived. The message included a photo and a simple caption: another bridge builder joins the family. Her middle name is Hope. David looked at Leah, then at Amira, then at the sprawling city below, a city where his brother had once dreamed of building bridges across every divide. Ready for tomorrow, he asked. Leah straightened, military bearing mixed with peaceful purpose. Always. There are more bridges to build. Amira touched the monument gently, and more lives to transform. Together they turned toward the future, carrying forward a legacy that had begun in pain but would continue in hope. Behind them, Jack's words gleamed on the monument's base. Death ends a life, not a relationship. Build bridges with every breath, until all walls fall. The night wind carried the promise of tomorrow, of more bridges to build, more lives to change, more hope to share. Jack's sacrifice had planted a seed that would grow forever, nourished by those who understood that the strongest bridges were built not of steel and stone, but of courage, compassion, and unwavering faith in human connection. The end. Sometimes the walls we build to protect ourselves become the prison that confines our humanity. Jack Wilson understood that true strength isn't found in the barriers we erect, but in the bridges we dare to build even when it costs us everything. His sacrifice teaches us that one life, purposefully given, can transform countless others. His story reminds us that our deepest wounds, like David's grief-hardened heart and Leah's burden of command, can become foundations for bridges of understanding. Every act of prejudice can be an opportunity for grace. Every moment of conflict a chance for connection. Every loss a seed of hope waiting to bloom. In our world of rising walls and deepening divides, we each face a choice to let fear calcify our pain into barriers, or to follow Jack's example and use our scars as building materials for bridges. Perhaps the most powerful truth is that it's never too late to transform our walls into bridges, because in the end, what we build with our lives will echo in the lives we touch long after we're gone. Jack didn't just die for what he believed in, he lived and died building a path for others to follow. In doing so, he shows us that sometimes our greatest legacy isn't in the life we protect, but in the bridges we leave behind for others to cross. The question isn't whether we will face walls in our lives, we all do. The question is whether we have the courage to transform them into bridges, even when the cost seems too high. Because in the end, bridges aren't built by those who see only what is, but by those who envision what could be. If this story of sacrifice, redemption, and the power of building bridges touched your heart, help us spread its message further. Hit subscribe to join our community of bridge builders, where we share stories that remind us of our shared humanity. Press like if you believe in the power of understanding over division. Share this video with family and friends who need to be reminded that it's never too late to transform walls into bridges. Most importantly, leave a comment below sharing how this story moved you, or share your own experience of breaking down barriers. Together, we can continue Jack's legacy of building bridges, one story at a time. Remember, every share could be the first step in someone else's journey from division to understanding.